Welcome, welcome, welcome to Susie Says. Today I'm joined by Abi Cook-Singh, whose work is driven by a deep passion for families, rural communities, and the people whose stories are too often left unheard. Abi's own journey took her from city life into a fourth-generation farming family on South Australia's Limestone coast, where she experienced firsthand the challenge of finding her place within family business and farm life. In recognising that many other rural women were facing the same struggles, we began gathering stories, particularly around the relationship between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law in farming families. That work became her award-winning Working Her Out research, earning her the 2007 South Australian AgriFutures Rural Women's Award and National Runner-Up recognition. Abi is also the director of its Work in Progress Proprietary Limited, trading as Working It Out Now. Welcome, Abi.
Thanks, Susie. I'm so excited to have been invited to join you today.
No, we've had so many lovely conversations and very like-minded thinking, I think, you and I, and I can really
Absolutely.
relate to your story. And I think it's amazing what you're doing. Can you take us back to the beginning and share a little bit about your journey from city life into a fourth-generation farming family? It's a lot daunting. I always say I was original farmer wants a wife, and you would have been similar. So, just for our listeners, take us back.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So at 24 and as a flight attendant at the time, I was flying in Queensland, but I moved actually from Adelaide, where I was born and grew up, down to the southeast in South Australia, marrying a fourth generation farmer that I had met at school. And I was also from a fifth generation master building family, so I loved everything about family business. To move down there I had visited, so I thought it was beautiful and I loved the sense of community. But it was an enormous change, and it did present me with, some feelings of isolation and how I would learn to fit in and how I could become part of not just family but also community. And I think with fourth generations, everyone's so well connected and entrenched in their daily routines. And a lot of it was brand new for me, not just the farm work that I wanted to participate in. The traditions and values that centred around living in the country and being on the land.
Yeah, and when, for them, I suppose everyone in their family dynamics, whether rural or not, it's a way of life. It's entrenched in them. But so if you're coming into that and you're not aware, it makes it quite tricky trying to fit in. So what was the hardest part of that transition for you personally?
I think I was very close to I am very close with my family, and so moving, I did want to actually go back and visit them quite a lot, I guess, to top up your cup and be yourself, because you have your new partner and you're learning to get to know his parents and his brother and the community on a whole. And I remember being, at the pub with him and not getting served straight away because I wasn't a local, I wasn't so much known. I was lining up in a certain area and everyone else is like, hi Sue, over here, 2 beers. And so I was heading home now and again to kind of top myself up with, my friends and family, and then heading back down. And, as well as learning the work, I remember going into Elders in Millicent, and I was just told to get a shoe for the tractor. I had no idea what I was looking for, and I really didn't want to ask if it was a real shoe or whether I was actually looking for a mechanical part, which is what I learnt. The latter was the right one. Yeah. But I also was learning what took place, what was a priority. So, that was absolutely, shearing came around, and we weren't going anywhere. There was work to be done, there was sheep to get up and yarding and shedding, etc. And, there's a great story that I've shared that has kind of become a part of Working Her Out, and I really wanted to get involved, and I offered to do the shearing, be the shearer's cook for the week. And I'd watched my mother-in-law and she was kind of hesitant, and I thought, she doesn't think I can do it. And I was like, no, I must do this. I can do this, And I noticed that she did, smoke her in the morning, and then she did lunch, and then she'd, come down with afternoon tea. And I'd observed and I'd roused in the shed, so I'd seen, that layout. And yes, she used to bake it and cook up all the roasts and for the sandwiches and things. So I thought, right, I'm ready, and cooked everything up. And I thought I'll add my own pizzazz. So I'm going to do big barbecues at lunchtime as well. So little did I realise I had to really start getting ready early so that when they do stop and they've got a set time that they can actually get this down into their stomachs and that it's not too heavy, that they don't feel like shearing for the rest of the day. And on the first day when I got to the shed with a car full of everything I needed, my father-in-law had arrived and there were all these Tupperware containers full of smoko and lunch. And they had, our family name on them. And I remember looking at my husband and saying, and he just gave me this look of, just don't say anything. Don't worry about it. Don't say anything. Just unpack, do your thing. Don't worry about it. And my mother-in-law had sent down smoko and lunch. And I guess I took it as she just didn't think I could do it. And I soldiered on and I did the week, and the baking went out the window, and I used to sneak into the deli in town and buy buns instead because I was getting exhausted because I was also pressing wool and shedding up in between. And by the time I'd cleaned up the shed at the end of the day, everyone else had gone. So it was a big week. But what this project and my passion for working her out and mothers and daughters in law is that I realised my mother-in-law had done that for a long time and taken on from her mother-in-law, and I was taking a task away from her that actually brought her around her son and her husband, that actually brought her around the shearers, who were community, young and old, and it gave her something to do. No, she was busy, had tasks at home and things like that, but was a purpose, and she wanted to help. And I just thought, why I made it all about myself, and I was so offended. And I remember being teary, thinking, gosh, she thought I couldn't do it, and she knew I was doing this. But we could have come together and just shared the task, and that would have been great because I was exhausted by the end of the week. And as time went on, we did that. But it was these things. I wasn't curious. I didn't ask the questions that I didn't know that I needed to know, for the information I needed to know. And we are coming...
Was that... Sorry, I just interrupt. I was just going to say, is that when you realised that what you were experiencing just wasn't your story, but it was something that many rural women are navigating?
Yeah, I think my mother-in-law was really good at introducing me to people in the country and taking me around to places and, getting me to meet people at the supermarket, the owners, and all sorts of things. So she was terrific. So that was my first experience myself. But on meeting the community, I used to hear the women, mothers and the daughters-in-law, the whispers. So they would meet me and then you'd hear a whisper about, it might be, we want to send our kids to school, but that's not how it's done here. And my mother-in-law just thinks I'm being this or that. Or it would be the mother-in-law, saying I'm just trying to see the children and offering to help, but apparently I'm, taking over and it's not my home, it's their home, and I should ring before I come. And I just remember thinking, this is such an amazing way of life and everyone's so intertwined and it's so lovely. But all these people feeling isolated within their own stories, mothers and daughters-in-law, and no one was talking about it. It was just the whispers underneath. But that creates, I realise, such discontent. And I know that the women are the nucleus for communication between the men and themselves, and their impact on rural business and family business, and their impact on health and happiness and resilience of a family is demonstrated through science, my research, as well as we know as women that we do a lot of the communicating and wrapping our arms around things. And I just thought, I have to write about this. I have to hear more of these stories. I want to try and help. I want to do something. And hence a 14-year journey.
But, as you said, the relationship between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law can be very complex in any setting, but particularly in farming family businesses. I think that's where it becomes just so much more complex. And as you said, it can be seen as a taking over or earning your stripes sometimes. I think it's like, well, you can't just come in and take over. But then also, as you said, you were playing out that conversation in your head of what you thought it was, but it was very much your mother-in-law's identity too. It was her, as you said, her time with her husband and son, but that's who she was. That was her. It is. They get, I know, I remember when I moved here, I said, I don't want to be the best at doing lunch and smoko. I just don't want to be talked about. I don't, because they do. I mean, I remember I got told my sandwiches were too fancy by Washira once, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so, you're dealing with that. And when you are out there, you're trying to impress, you're trying to fit in. And yeah, and so I think, what you're doing is amazing. I think it's admirable, because I think absolutely, if like your mother-in-law would have gone through that with her mother-in-law, and so why don't we work together instead of being competitive?
Absolutely. I mean, on an aside, my mother-in-law couldn't cook. Her family owned hotels and it was kind of done in the house, but her mother-in-law, so my ex-husband's grandmother, taught her how to cook. And yet it's really interesting. So there must have been a lot of pride to then be able to, cook as well as she did, which she did, absolutely. I mean, she's passed now and I still miss a lot of her dishes. And yet that would have been a story, in the beginning that I would have loved to have understood, and then maybe my behavior would have been different. I think as women we are titled with this mother and daughter-in-law title, and it's interesting that we've given mother in that title and we've given daughter in that title, and we may be extremely different and come from diverse cultures and beliefs and values, etc. And we usually are. It is interesting that our sons may go on to choose someone who's very different with us, but having a career of 20 years in the community services sector, so working with child protection or homelessness or refugee and different cultures and disability and the like, we have a greater need now to ensure that family is that village, to be able to have oversight, greater oversight, to be able to look after our elderly and keep them vital through sharing, for the daughter-in-laws to share their knowledge of tech, to keep our elderly current and vital. And the same thing is our mother-in-laws, depending on what age you are and what stage, but to share in the parenting when both parents are generally working and trying to make ends meet or get into this housing market and things like that. And with addictions and with disability, etc., the greater the family connection and resilience, the better off we all will be. So I think it's important work, and what spurred me on to turn this into a longitudinal study. So I did the work for the award, the Rural Women's Award, and then 11 years later went back and re-interviewed a sample of the women and found that not a lot had changed, or if anything, some relationships had disintegrated and some left with just, this is how it is. And I hate to see...
It's how it's always been.
Yeah, it's how it's always been. It's just what it is. We're not happy about it. And I just think... life's too short. So that became an academic paper, and we've spoken to the topic overseas and across Australia, and let me tell you, there are stories and the same conversations happening worldwide. And what was unique...
So it's common themes. So through your research, there are common themes that keep emerging.
Absolutely. In family business, in rural family business, and also across generational relationships, so the mother and the daughter-in-law. We're not curious. We don't consider the diversity of our traditions, our values, what we have, and we need to know that, quickly up front, and we need to see the importance of it, that this female relationship is extremely important, and we've labelled it, really. We've put... what spurred me on to do my Working Her Out podcast is watching the morning program, and I think the male anchor was talking about a news event, and it had something to do with the mother-in-law said this. And the female anchor just rolled her eyes and said, oh, when will we do something about that? And I just thought, how do we get outside of that type of thinking? And actually, at the end of my Rural Women's Award, my last conversation was back in my own hometown in the southeast, in the Limestone coast. And I was speaking to 80 women above 80, and they all wanted to share their daughter-in-law's stories. None of them wanted to speak as mother-in-laws. They wanted to remember their difficulty and their challenges, not what they'd done differently going forward.
Yeah. So two sort of questions here. So what do you think families still misunderstand about the role and experience of women who marry into farming businesses?
I think we need to have our eyes and ears wide open to the entering person for two reasons. From a psychology side of it all, if we look at a general age group coming into marriage, say they're in their 20s, if it's early 20s, they're still undergoing brain development. We call that section the emerging adult. And that emerging adult is still working with risk, and the brain synapses are still kind of cutting off to create that rounded young person. And it's a really strong time for the female and male emerging adult, to really want to harness career and relationships. And what we know about that emerging adult stage is that the female carer, so the mother-in-law, the mother has a great deal of influence right up until post 25, 26 on mirroring what relationships should look like and how you have them. So if the son has had a positive mirroring of relationships, or the talk has been open between him and his mother, she has an enormous influence as to how he'll shape his relationship around his new wife, or not shape it around his new life. Yeah. And that's science. The other thing is appreciating that she will come with ideas and skills and knowledge and a desire to get it right, and a desire to have a career or whatever. So if we look at her just as a female human being, that's kind of the stage where she's at. She's wanting to be independent and create a home, etc. So we need to see her where she's at. And with farming, we need to look at how we do things, and that is going to be very different to the person coming into that way of life, that farming family, unless they've come off another property. But they will still have different ways of doing things, different beliefs, different standards. It's not just being open. Why?
Yeah, so why do you think family farm dynamics can be so challenging to navigate, even when everyone has good intentions?
I think being on the land, we know how heavily we secure ourselves to the dirt. You know, that's why it's so hard, damn hard, for males and female farmers to leave the land. You know, we believe we are part of it. And there's a lot of pride in being a generational farmer. There's lots of pride, and holding on to our farms, and the term legacy we always hear, wanting to leave a legacy. So it's very traditional, and also the buzzword, the term, it's not my favourite term, but succession as well. And I work with farming families around not succession, around actually realising that legacy is many things. It's bringing up your children, it's providing values and experiences, that's a legacy. You know, sharing information and knowledge is legacy. You know, it's many things other than just the money. And there's not many rural environments I'll go to where people don't introduce themselves as what generation they are. You know, and I know that I used to do it. Oh, fourth generation sheep cattle cropping. It was like my moniker, you know, I could just get it out straight away. That was me. And then I might meet someone who says fifth generation. I think, ooh, that's impressive, you know. So we do feel we sit within a community. And I think that's because it's tight-knit. I think it's because it's really hard work. I think it's because often it can be asset-rich, cash-poor. So it can be hard and you endure. And I think of fear of change, a big fear of change, that someone entering may want to take that away from you. We're probably the only business that promises the next generation a business 30 years in advance. And yet we
But
do
when
it.
you've got, yeah, but when you've got multiple generations and strong personalities and blurred lines between, home and business, there's some really big pressure points there. And I agree. Is it the fear of it being taken, or is it the fear of the unknown? And as it becomes,
I think it's both. I use the word curious. We don't get curious. We don't ask the questions that we need to know. There is nothing, I think what I wanted to say on that with farms is, in your business, you probably do a budget and then you set your strategy and then you set your cropping, plan and all of this. And we're always working with accountants and budgets and things. And yet when it comes to this farm, like I said, 30 years in advance, we'll promise or we'll start talking about, it's going to be yours one day and I've worked hard and, one day you're going to do this. Well, how do you know? People get sick, people die. Look at our economy at the moment, the political environment, the environmental environment. I don't know anyone who can budget 33 years in advance or 30 years or 20 years in advance. We're actually taking a guess and it's loaded with hope to keep tradition, to keep whole. So there's a lot of personal pressure, I think, for the farming family that we place on ourselves unnecessarily. But we need to be curious about those that come into that environment. And I spoke to a farmer the other day and I said, are you the guardian of the property or are you the owner? Where do you see yourself as a farmer? And this gentleman said, what's the right one? And I said, there is no right one. What do you feel you are, Yeah, what do you think? And he looked at me and he said, I'm the owner. I said, okay. He said, oh, is that tough, is it? Is that the wrong way? I said, no, not at all. I said, as long as everyone else knows that. I said, is that a discussion you have with your son? And he said, and daughter-in-law, and he said, no. And I said, so the farm's yours? He said, yeah, I'm the owner. And I said, that's all cool. Be the owner, give them the opportunity to see you in that light and adjust so that they can make choices with that knowledge. So sometimes the conversation that we're not having could be so helpful in just letting us navigate what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like for my husband, it's not owner or guardian. It's, well, I suppose it indicates that it's guardian, but he always says to leave it in a better condition than what that you had the honour of farming it and you leave it in a better condition than what it was handed to you for. But,
Absolutely.
Some of those biggest pressure points between women in particular in family business systems and, how do they have those conversations? How can they be handled more constructively in your research and opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these conversations are really difficult if communication is, you don't see that as a strength for yourself. And as a counsellor, I work with families and individuals in how we have these conversations in a way that are, once again, more curious, that are more inquiring as to thoughts, perceptions, storytelling. Tell us how you did this. This is how I like to do this. Sharing of stories is really helpful and it shows interest. And a lot of the time we might be moving in as a daughter-in-law and replacing tasks, or it may let me leave the mother-in-law feeling moved out or moving or acknowledging age or a different stage of life. And that can be challenging. So I think some of our questions have to be about where we are at. A woman coming in and getting married may be aligning with a mother-in-law that's going through menopause, where life and career is changing, where our thought processes and our physical activity is showing change as well, and life might be getting a little bit more difficult, where we're starting to look at, what life looks like beyond work and together with our partner. They're really challenging times, and to have, a fit, healthy young person coming in firing on all cylinders can be challenging, can look like your younger self, can make you feel a little bit of resentment. We just need to see what that looks like. And that does, remind me of my mother-in-law on some occasions. As she and I aged, those conversations were easier. But I really hope that through my work and these conversations with you, Susie, and your work, and I hope to be doing some workshops with mothers and daughters-in-law, that we have a bit of a global movement, that we stop rolling the eye at the mother and daughter-in-law dynamic, realise it for the people that hold families together. They are these women, and we have them early. I'd love us to see meetings of mothers and future daughters-in-law coming together before marriage to their son, realising the power and the influence that the older generation has with that new relationship. And I'm also currently developing a tool that I think will help make it easier to have those challenging conversations. I also think it can be fun.
What practical difference are you hoping that tool will make for rural women and their families?
I actually interviewed my daughter, who's not engaged yet or whatever, but moved in with her partner and quite committed, and they're developing a relationship with their family, and interesting, both having country backgrounds. That has made it easier. There's some common ground there. But with doing an interview and speaking about boundaries and how they communicate and who has the role of communicating the different subjects, like she said, I'd leave that one to my partner Matt to have that conversation, or he sets it straight that Sundays are their family day only, like the two of them, like please ring if you're visiting. Obviously if you're down from the country we would welcome, but generally a Sunday is our together day. So they're setting boundaries already. And his mother, like her hopefully future mother-in-law, she felt quite teary. She said it's quite exposing to look at how you operate your own family, and also proud that they were having these conversations. But she said, oh God, we all as daughter-in-laws or mother-in-law need to have these conversations before marriage and actually realise how important we are to the success of those relationships and generational move and business, because our impact on business is also, substantial.
This podcast is sponsored by Workbench for the Mind, a mental fitness program created by me, Susie Evans. After navigating my own loss and years of working with people in emotional pain, I created Workbench for the Mind to give people something practical, not pressure. It's a calm, structured space to lay things out, make sense of what you're feeling, and build tools you can use every day. You're not broken. You're learning how to support your mind. Find out more at susieevans.com. And often in fourth, fifth generation families, it's still run by the older generation. So the ones doing all the physical work and whatever. As you touched on earlier, most farming families are asset rich, cash flow poor, so that can have a real snowball effect. So on that, what advice? I'm going to say I was very lucky. My beautiful auntie, when I said I was moving in with Mick on the farm, and I think I've told you this before, she said, "Oh, you're going to have such a wonderful life." She said, "It is just such a special," she said, "you can't explain it living on the land and whatever." She said, "You'll become very close. It's a wonderful relationship." But she said, "Always keep a little bit of your own money and always keep your own car." And I think from that and my experience here is I've learnt that the best way I describe it is that the farm is the wife and I'm the mistress, and the farm is always first. And so if you can accept that and live with that and have the love of the land, then you will survive. But what advice would you give to women considering a future in agriculture or stepping into a farming family for the first time?
Yeah, I listened to that, and there is so much truth, and it reminds me that everyone has their own way of acknowledging it. And I agree. I think there's ways in which to, if you are entering the farm, if we have these conversations up front and it is a generational farm and there is a set direction or hope for direction, that having conversations that you may not know, that you need to know when you're younger, and coming in and you're in love and you just want to embrace it all. And it will give you a beautiful experience. Absolutely. It's why I feel so passionate about it. But if you have these conversations, you can invest off land. You can put some, money aside. You can work out how a career can exist and flourish without impacting, or maybe everyone does just shuffle a little bit. I encourage those conversations up. I encourage the men to step forward. And I've just done a podcast with 3 men, 3 who originally started on the land, 1 still on the land with 3 sons, and 1 of 4 brothers and a mother. And all these men, one's engaged, one's single, and one's married, obviously, and they talk about their love of mum, love of their partner, how they come between and what they think their role is. And they all said that they felt their role was, interestingly, because it may not always feel like it does this, but to support their partner coming into the fold, to help with the clarity, to maybe learn some skills so that they can communicate it better, their family dynamic to her, hers to them. They appreciate that because they know how their world works, they don't share that as well as they could, and that they also wish it was spoken of more, that when you bring a partner into your life and you're within a family farm or a farming business or just generally, that it is a new nucleus. I listened to a friend of mine, actually one of the guys that we did interview, I spoke to his father earlier and said, your son's going to interview and he's engaged and he's going to be married next year. And he said, yes, I thought to myself, oh, we're so lucky she's coming into our family. She's becoming one of us. Yeah. And he said, I am quickly reminded by my son, who's quite progressive, who said, no, Dad, we're starting a new family, but we look forward to you being involved.
Yes, I like that.
And the older generation who I spoke with, who's on the land, said, we need to not be as quiet as we are about that in community and on farms. We need to appreciate that next generation, though they may be for part of our business and our family, they're actually their own new nucleus, and it's respectful.
And that's really powerful, isn't it? And I know 20 years I've been here, and I know I was astounded when I first moved out to this community, the amount of women who didn't actually have their own bank account, that it was still that, the weekly trip, because it started off going to the the sheep or stock market, drop the wife off with the money for the shopping, and they'd go to the market, then go to the pub, and then the wife would drive home. But how much that still goes on.
Absolutely.
Probably not so much right now. And then so you bring someone in who hasn't grown up in that environment, that's come from the city and gone, right, I can do this, I can do that. And you've probably got the older male going, whoa, girlie.
Horrified.
You are sort of.
It is. It's a different language. It's just learning each other's language. And it does. When we don't know each other's language, we misinterpret, we don't understand, it feels foreign. And that's what it is.
The story we tell ourselves.
Exactly. And forms what we do. That's so right, Susie. And I think that's what the men were saying too. We need to get better at translating for our family and translating back.
Because they're both saying the same thing. And they're both probably, it's security for themselves, it's security for the property and security for themselves. And the young wife coming in, it's security for the land and her husband, and it's also security for her children and herself if something happens to her husband. So there's so many dynamics here that it's just the way it's always been and the way it is. And then, when things aren't openly discussed and what everyone's intentions are from an early start, then that's when you can see property, 4th and 5th generation properties being sold up through divorces and family split-ups and siblings, and we could do a whole nother episode on that. But I suppose
I think
studying your experience. Yeah, go on.
I think that's, like we say, the psychology, the science behind that. The mother-in-law has quite a lot of power. And if we're speaking a different language, and a lot of guys will go, oh, hands off, not getting involved in that, they're bickering, I don't know what it's about, I'm just going to go out on the farm and pretend it's not happening. I think we need to work with that, because confrontation can be difficult. It doesn't need to be, but it can be. And I think we need to understand the power we have in both roles, and that we're actually walking alongside a human that we both love, being the man we come to the relationship with and the mother. And all men will say, but that's mum, she just doesn't understand that that's her way. And then they always also go, oh, but that's, Susie, she's like that, she gets excited and wants to do this, or she likes to bring business ideas. And everyone's going, whoa, we don't need new business ideas, this is what we do. We can bring a bit of humour to it. And at the moment I'm doing a survey with some clients with the children, because what we perceive is what is wanted. We don't always know, we don't always get it right. And so we actually need to have those conversations. Yeah, I think it can be a real exciting time. I think we all need to do it. I look forward to getting around Australia into some rooms and then have it the norm that mothers and daughters-in-law, or, we're talking about same-sex marriages, the same thing. They still walk into the same dynamic, no matter what gender or preference we have. So, and I'll go there one day soon too. But yeah, I hope we can create really resilient families and family businesses by working with what is a really amazing dynamic. And that is these women that are behind the titles, like yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I was very grateful and very blessed. An auntie that lived out here all her life and never had a daughter, so I was like the daughter she didn't have. My mother-in-law was just a beautiful soul that would help any way she could. Interesting, just a little funny anecdote, is my husband, said when my mother-in-law passed, he wanted a copy of her recipes. There were these favourite recipes. And of course, when they came down, a lot of them had Jean on them, and grandmother. So my mother-in-law and younger, she didn't have a lot of recipes. So my grandmother used to give her the recipes. So it was, that's what they did. And I'm sure there's pockets of women that did work well together and did well throughout. But I think that more of city coming in and different dynamics, so many different aspects happening, and it's hard to explain, but the general farming hasn't changed and won't change, and probably nor should a lot of it. But you've got all these other new things coming in and throwing at them that it...
You're so right, Susie. I mean, our social environment, our technology, how we communicate these days, everything's changed, really. If we look at understanding that an emerging adult isn't really fully formed until, 25 or something like this. The youth travel more. They take their time thinking about, they try different jobs, they, marry later. All these kind of things are a difference between our generations. So these are some of the questions we need to, find out how that fits for the young generation, and also share stories about what it was like for us. I remember I've worked in lots of careers, but that was very not cool. It was cool to choose one career and go with that. I always thought I was very difficult, wanting to do a whole lot of different things. You got gold watches for working in organisations for a long period of time. So that was like a standard. And I think farming's a bit like that. How many years on the land, and we don't see enough farmers pat themselves on the back for the amazing work and achievements they do. It's like a never-ending goal. But yeah, we want to preserve that too.
Just a couple of things before we close off, just with what I do, the mental fitness and the mental health. So are there any, like I noticed, like a lot of the farms get bigger. So, a farm sells, a family moves out and a neighbour buys the farm. So a family doesn't necessarily move back in. In our areas too, a lot of the local footy clubs, are folding, or the schools fold. So people are having to drive further to take kids to sport and that. And many years ago, that was the tradition, that no matter what happened during the week, all farming families were all the same. it didn't matter. They all had the same issues. They'd come together, they'd go to football, netball, there'd be a local dance at one of the halls, and that was their social connection, whereas a lot of that's gone now.
Yeah, and we saw that in our community as well. The blue gums came in and sold up. A lot of farms sold to blue gums and it was great money, etc. But it took people and services out of the community. And you're right, every weekend was at the footy club and we were all on committees and selling wood and doing whatever. But I think that is a big change. And so I think what's interesting about that is as we get more isolated, because you're right, farm benchmarking, you've got to have way more land now to be able to, to be benchmarked as viable. And when I was on the board for rural financial counselling for South Australia, that was a big time for that in exceptional circumstances when people were having to leave the land and they were being bought up by neighbours or bigger consortiums, and benchmarking just went up, and so many people realising that there was an equity in what they were doing. And that takes away people, that questions people's worth and skills, and it takes away services. And I think if I relate that to the dynamic that we're talking about today, use the older generation for how they've endured crisis before. Ask them what they did, how they communicated, how they came together. What did they do when things got tough? Because God knows they've been there. Use the younger generation for showing you technology, how we can still remain, if we all work together and do some fun things, if we remain family and keep that solid, then we won't feel lonely. And how we can use our skills together to look at other industry, other enterprises that mean that we can remain viable. Because that is what they'll bring as well. If we look across the lifespan, we have opportunities to share wisdom and stories and experiences and see what works and then use innovation. Because I agree with you, we'll see more of it with fuel. Absolutely. And I remember not being able to go and see my parents as much in Adelaide. We were shooting sheep when we got married and things like that. Filling a tank of fuel off the farm just seemed indulgent, and I totally understood that. But how did I get around not seeing them, which I was so used to? So we did other things. We did FaceTime at the dinner table where we all had a roast on a Sunday night and chatted that way. We found ways around it, and I think that is the generational positives that we can have.
Yeah, I like that. And you've probably answered this a bit, but I'll ask it anyway. After all the stories you've heard and all the work you've done, what do you most want people to remember about women, family and life on the land?
I want them to remember all those memories that they have of great times on the land. And that's working alongside, even when things aren't that great, maybe, is the fun stuff that happens when you work alongside, the rewarding moments, the community events, that we are all different, and that's what makes it interesting. We've all got characters that we talk about, in our local town or whatever, who make it the fibre that it is. That's because it's good to have the difference. I want them to realise that when it feels tough and isolating, that you're probably not on your own. So the effort that we put into all the outcomes that you work with, from isolation or lack of communication and struggle and poor mental health, that actually takes a lot of physical effort and mental effort. Let's put the same effort into stopping people eye roll about this dynamic, realising that there are humans, there are women with amazing stories behind those titles, and let's get curious. 75% of small to medium businesses in Australia are family businesses, and over 70% of succession plans fail. We need to do something differently, and we need to put that energy into having those difficult conversations that can turn into just brilliant sharing of stories. I think our Indigenous culture probably had that right, communicate across our country. Yeah. And remember how, I think just be positive. Think about how we know that when we mend something, When we mend a fence, we get a sense of gratification. When we mend a relationship, that is also going to be really rewarding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you. Abby, how can people find you if they want to reach out, connect, or hear more about you? We will obviously put links in below.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Susie. I've got to acknowledge your work, and yes, we do sit on the same page with many things that we've talked about, and I think we're both really passionate about this, and obviously mental is so important. Working It Out Now website, so that's really simple to find, and on Spotify I have the Working Her Out podcast, and they can also make contact with me. All my details are on my website or through yourself.
Great. Yes, no, we'll put the link in below. Abi Cook-Singh, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. As always, we could go on for hours. Thank you for joining me, and I've absolutely loved hosting you on Susie Says.
Thank you, Susie. Congratulations on all your efforts, and everyone just needs to keep listening.
Thank you.